Before you hear his name, you should know this. Thomas Miller wasn't a monster from the shadows. He was the man who lived next door, quiet, polite, invisible. Between 1988 and 1989, he stole 4 children from small towns across Ohio. He didn't do it for money. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it because it made him feel real. For nearly a year, he turned an ordinary stretch of America into a place of fear. Playgrounds emptied. Parents slept with lights on. And when police finally caught him, what they found inside his home would haunt them for the rest of their lives. This story isn't about death. It's about how evil hides in plain sight. How it smiles, how it speaks, and how it waits for someone to notice. If you choose to keep listening, remember, he was never hiding in the dark.
In the late 1980s, the suburbs of Fairfield County, Ohio, were the kind of place Americans called home with pride. Rows of tidy 2-story houses stood behind white fences, their porches draped with hanging flower baskets. Children rode their bikes down tree-lined streets, while neighbors waved from driveways. It was the calm, familiar heartland image, the kind of town where nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen. But beneath that calm, something unspeakable was stirring. In the summer of 1988, Fairfield and the greater Columbus area would become the stage for a string of crimes so cruel, so senseless, that they would haunt the nation for decades. It began not with a body, but with a disappearance. A child who simply vanished into thin air. Her name was Emily Carter. She was only 4 years old, a family living the American dream. The Carters lived in Maplewood Estates, an affluent neighborhood in northern Fairfield. The lawns were wide and freshly mowed, the houses big enough for 2 cars and a golden retriever. Robert Carter, Emily's father, was the president of a small but successful design firm in Columbus, specializing in architectural interiors. His wife, Linda, was a homemaker, elegant, soft-spoken, and deeply devoted to her children. Together, they were raising 2 kids, Matthew, age 7, and Emily, the family's youngest and only daughter. By every measure, the Carters were living the American dream. They were respected in their community, active in their church, and well-liked by their neighbors. Emily was the light of their lives, cheerful, curious, always asking questions about everything she saw. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends, and a laugh that could fill a room. Every afternoon she played with the children on her street, skipping rope or drawing chalk flowers on the sidewalk. In Maplewood Estates, it wasn't unusual for kids her age to wander freely between homes. Parents trusted the neighborhood. It felt safe. Everyone knew everyone, until that day. August 22nd, 1988, the day everything changed. That Monday began like any other in late summer, the kind of humid Ohio day when the air hung heavy and cicadas screamed from the trees. Emily had spent the morning splashing in the community pool with her friends. She came home just after 2:30 p.m., dripping wet, towel around her shoulders, humming a tune she'd learned from TV. "Mommy," she said as she stepped through the kitchen door, "can I go play at Jenny's house after I change?" Linda smiled. "Sure, honey. Just be back before dinner." Emily nodded, scurried upstairs to change into her favorite pink shorts and white sandals, and a few minutes later skipped out the front door. It was the last time anyone in the Carter family saw her alive. By 6:30 that evening, the sun dipped low, painting the streets in orange light. Dinner was ready. Grilled chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. Robert Carter had just pulled into the driveway after a long day at the office. Linda called upstairs for Emily. No answer. Maybe she's still at Jenny's, she thought, picking up the phone. She dialed Jenny's house. The line clicked. Jenny's mother answered. "Oh no, Linda, Emily didn't come by today. Jenny's been home all afternoon." For a few seconds, Linda couldn't speak. Her hand trembled as she hung up the phone. She ran outside, calling her daughter's name down the street. "Emily, Emily, dinner's ready!" No response. Neighbors soon joined in the search. Robert jumped into his car and drove around the block, his headlights sweeping the darkening yards. Others grabbed flashlights and combed through bushes, empty lots and playgrounds. By 9 p.m., there was still no sign of her. Panic spread through the quiet streets like wildfire. That's when the Carters called the police. The first hours, the call came into the Fairfield Police Department at 9:14 p.m. Sergeant Mark Peterson was the first officer on the scene. He found Linda sobbing on the front porch while Robert paced the driveway, clutching a flashlight. "It's been over 6 hours," Robert said. "She went to her friend's house at 3. She should have been home hours ago." Peterson quickly organized a neighborhood search. Patrol cars rolled slowly down Maplewood Drive, with their spotlights scanning the yards. Officers knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen a little girl with blonde hair wearing pink shorts and white sandals. Nothing. By midnight, the Fairfield Fire Department had joined the search. Sweeping the nearby woods and drainage ditches, volunteers from the community brought coffee and flashlights. A police helicopter hovered overhead, its spotlight cutting through the trees like a pale eye. But as dawn approached, hope began to fade. There were no footprints, no pieces of clothing, no clues of any kind. It was as if Emily Carter had simply evaporated from the earth. By sunrise, more than 50 officers and volunteers had joined the search for Emily Carter. The police set up a command post in the parking lot of a nearby church. Local TV crews arrived before breakfast, and the once quiet Maplewood estates became a sea of flashing lights and reporters' microphones. Lieutenant Harold Simmons, head of the Fairfield Police Detective Unit, faced the cameras that morning. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. "We're doing everything we can," he said. "At this point, we're treating this as a missing person case. But we haven't ruled anything out. Behind the scenes, the tone was far more grim. The Search Expands officers searched every inch of the Carters' neighborhood, backyards, sheds, basements, even storm drains. Police dogs picked up a faint scent trail near the edge of a pedestrian bridge, about a block from the Carter home. But it ended abruptly at the sidewalk. That bridge, a simple overpass that crossed Maple Avenue, became the focal point of the investigation. Emily would have needed to cross it if she'd been heading toward her friend's house or the park. Detectives theorized that she might not have taken the bridge at all. Maybe she'd tried to cross the busy road below. And a driver, frightened after hitting her, panicked and took her away. The area under the bridge was cordoned off, and crime scene technicians spent hours scouring the asphalt for traces of a collision, skid marks, paint chips, blood. They found nothing. No accident had occurred there. The theory fell apart as quickly as it was proposed. A family in hell inside their 2-story home, the Carters' world had stopped. Linda refused to sleep. She sat by the living room window, waiting for the phone to ring. Robert tried to stay composed, giving interviews, handing out flyers, but exhaustion carved deep shadows beneath his eyes. At the kitchen table, hundreds of photocopied flyers were stacked neatly, each one with Emily's photo. Missing Emily Carter, age 4, blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing pink shorts and white sandals. Neighbors gathered at the Carters' home daily to help distribute them across Fairfield, Columbus, and neighboring counties. Local stores taped them in windows. The post office displayed one near the entrance. By the end of the first week, over 50,000 flyers had been printed. Theories multiply. When no ransom call came, detectives began to suspect a more disturbing possibility: abduction by a sexual predator. It wasn't a theory they wanted to speak about publicly, but behind closed doors, investigators were beginning to whisper it. Still, Robert Carter's position as the head of a prominent Columbus company complicated matters. There was the possibility of revenge or business retaliation, perhaps a disgruntled employee, a failed contract, or someone looking for leverage. Fairfield detectives interviewed every employee at Robert's firm and cross-checked their backgrounds with criminal records. They interrogated contractors, delivery drivers, and even a former intern who had recently been fired. Each lead went nowhere. Forensic evidence was non-existent. No fingerprints, no fibers, no witnesses. It was as if the world had swallowed Emily whole. The town holds its breath by the second week. Fairfield had changed. Parents who once let their children ride bikes freely now kept them indoors. School sent letters home advising extra caution. The neighborhood playground, once filled with laughter, now sat silent and empty. Every unfamiliar face became a source of suspicion. Strangers were questioned. Vans were reported for simply driving slowly past a park. At the grocery store, people whispered Emily's name like a curse. "You heard about that Carter girl? Poor thing, just vanished. You think they'll ever find her?" Each day that passed without news deepened the community's unease. For the first time in memory, Fairfield didn't feel safe. False hope on September 3, 1988. 12 days after the disappearance, police received a tip from a truck driver who claimed he'd seen a man leading a young blonde girl into a rest stop off I-71. 50 miles south of Fairfield, officers rushed to the scene. Surveillance footage, grainy black and white, showed a man fitting the description. But the little girl in the video wasn't Emily. Linda broke down when she heard the news. "I just want my baby home," she cried to a local reporter, clutching Emily's stuffed rabbit in her hands. The image of a grieving mother on the evening news shattered hearts across Ohio. Desperation. By late September, nearly a month had passed. Detectives were exhausted. Lieutenant Simmons ordered aerial searches with helicopters and heat imaging cameras. Divers swept through nearby ponds and drainage canals. Still nothing. Police began to realize they were chasing a ghost. "This isn't just a missing child," one detective was heard saying. "Someone took her, and they knew exactly what they were doing." The word sent chills through the task force. If Emily Carter had been abducted, whoever did it had vanished just as efficiently as his victim. A shift in focus. The investigation, once local, now involved the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and the FBI's Missing Children Task. Force behavioral analysts arrived to build a profile. Their preliminary theory suggested an organized offender, someone intelligent, methodical, likely male with access to transportation and familiarity with the area. "He's watching," one profiler warned. "He blends in. He's not done yet." No one could have known how terrifyingly right they were, because in just 6 weeks another little girl, in another quiet town, would disappear under eerily similar circumstances. October 3, 1988. 6 weeks after Emily Carter vanished, Fairfield's panic had barely begun to settle when the phone rang again at police headquarters. "My daughter didn't come home from school." The voice on the line belonged to Patricia Young of Ridgefield, a town only 20 miles west of Fairfield. Her 7-year-old daughter, Melissa Young, a first grader at Ridgefield Elementary, had disappeared on her walk home. She'd left school at 3 p.m., book bag slung over one shoulder, lunchbox in hand. The walk home took 10 minutes. At 3:15, she was seen turning onto Oak Lane, and then she was gone. Deja Vu Lieutenant Harold Simmons read the report in silence. Same county, same circumstances. No witnesses. A girl between 4 and 8. He set the paper down and muttered, "It's happening again." By evening, officers from Fairfield, Ridgefield, and the state police had formed a joint command post at Ridgefield Elementary. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs scoured the woods behind the school. Reporters swarmed the scene. One headline in the Columbus Tribune the next morning read, "Another child missing in Fairfield County." People who'd hoped Emily Carter's case was an isolated tragedy now faced the possibility of something far worse, a pattern. The Young family Patricia. Young was a part-time waitress. Her husband, Dennis Young, drove a taxi in Columbus. They lived modestly but happily in a small blue house at the edge of town. Melissa was quiet, responsible beyond her years. She loved drawing horses and helping her mother bake cookies. She had never once failed to come straight home after school. When darkness fell and her seat at the dinner table sat empty, Patricia walked the familiar route herself, flashlight in hand, calling out into the cold October air. "Melissa, it's Mom. Come home." There was no answer, only the rustle of leaves. At 8 p.m. she called the Ridgefield police. Within an hour, search parties fanned out across fields and alleyways, tracing every step between the school and the young residents. Nothing but silence by midnight. More than 100 volunteers were combing the area. Officers checked drainage ditches, barns, abandoned sheds. State troopers blocked highways, inspecting every car that matched even the vaguest description of dark sedan. The results were the same as before. No witnesses, no clues, no ransom call. Detective Simmons stared at the caseboard back in Fairfield, 2 little girls' photos pinned side by side. He drew a red string between them. Same age group, same daytime abduction, same silence. He turned to his team. "We're looking at one man." The media storm. By the end of the week, both cases dominated national news. ABC News ran a segment titled "The Lost Daughters of Ohio." CNN broadcast live from Fairfield's courthouse lawn. Cameras captured patrol cars rolling down empty suburban streets. Mothers clutching their children, fathers installing extra locks on doors. Every parent's nightmare, one anchor declared. And it was. Schools shortened class hours. Playgrounds stood deserted. Halloween was cancelled in 3 towns. Churches held candlelight vigils where hundreds prayed for the safe return of our children. The investigation widens. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico sent 2 profilers, Agent Peter Langford and Dr. Claire Henson, to assist. They studied the timelines, geography, and victim profiles. Their conclusion chilled everyone in the room. "You have a single organized offender," Dr. Henson said. "Likely male, 25 to 35, socially isolated, intelligent, with a fixation on young girls. He'll keep souvenirs. And he's not finished." When asked what drove someone like that, she added quietly, "Power, control, the illusion of intimacy. He'll do it again soon." A town under siege. October bled into November. The weather turned sharp and grey. Each morning parents walked their children to school, eyes darting to every passing car. Fairfield's mayor ordered nightly curfews for minors. Police patrols doubled. The FBI set up a hotline that rang constantly. Most tips were false leads born of fear. A man in a van near the playground. Someone taking photos at the mall. A stranger offering candy. Each call was logged, each checked, each dead-ended. Detectives worked 20-hour days. Coffee cups and cigarette butts littered their desks. Yet, despite the manpower, the case refused to move. No evidence, no body. No closure. Behind closed doors, the strain on the young family was unbearable. Reporters camped outside their house, shoving microphones through the fence. Patricia stopped eating. Dennis rarely spoke. When a TV anchor asked if they believed their daughter was still alive, Patricia whispered, "I have to believe that. If I stop, she's gone for real." Her words aired nationwide, bringing in sympathy and letters. Some were prayers. Others were cruel hoaxes. One envelope arrived with a child's drawing inside, a stick-figure girl beside the words, "Melissa is sleeping." The handwriting was shaky, uneven, childlike, but not from a child. Police traced the postmark to Columbus but found nothing else. The breaking point, 2 months after Melissa's disappearance, in early December 1988, Fairfield police held a closed-door meeting with the State Attorney General's office. 4 hours later, Lieutenant Simmons stepped outside to a crowd of reporters and said the words no one wanted to hear. "We are now treating both cases as probable homicides." The statement silenced the entire courtyard. Behind him, Patricia Young collapsed into her husband's arms. The town that once defined safety now lived under a shadow of dread. And somewhere in that same Ohio winter night, a man was already hunting again. By the end of 1988, Fairfield County was a community on edge. 2 children gone. 2 investigations cold. Every unsolved hour was another reminder that something terrible was stalking Ohio's heartland. Then came December 12th, 1988, a date that would change everything. The third disappearance, It was a Monday afternoon in Brookfield, a quiet suburb 30 miles southwest of Columbus. 4-year-old Erica Davis had just returned home from preschool. Her mother, Sandra Davis, helped her out of the family's old Chevy, kissed her on the forehead, and watched as the little girl ran to the front yard to play on the grass. It was 4:55 p.m. By 5:10, she was gone. Sandra called out from the porch when she realized the yard was empty. No answer. She searched the yard, then the neighbors' yards, then the small park across the street. Within 30 minutes, she was dialing 911. "My daughter's missing," she cried. She was right here. I turned away for just a minute. Police units were dispatched immediately. But this time they wouldn't find just an empty space. The discovery 3 days later. On December 15th, 2 men gathering firewood near Lake Monroe, 40 miles west of Brookfield, stumbled upon something lying in a patch of dead leaves beside an old service road. At first they thought it was a doll. Then they saw the small hand. When detectives arrived, the area was sealed off. Snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the trees and the child's hair. The coroner later confirmed what everyone feared. The remains were Erica Davis. For the first time there was a body, and for the first time there were clues. The witnesses, the 2 men who'd found the body, Walter and Jerry Wilson, brothers in their 40s, told police they'd noticed something odd earlier that same day. "We saw a black car, maybe a Toyota or Nissan, coming down from the Ridge Road," Walter said. "It got stuck in the drainage ditch, so we helped the driver push it out. The man," they said, looked to be around 30, clean-shaven, average height, and wearing thick glasses. His demeanor was strange, calm, almost too calm. He didn't say thank you. He just sped off like the devil was after him. That small detail, a dark Japanese sedan stuck on a forest road, would become the single thread investigators clung to for months. The evidence crime scene technicians recovered tire tracks. From the muddy shoulder, a few footprints, and a single scrap of white fabric that appeared to be from a child's dress. The autopsy revealed Erica had been strangled. There were no signs of sexual assault, but several superficial injuries suggested she'd struggled. Her clothing was missing. Detectives believed the killer had transported her in a vehicle, killed her elsewhere, and dumped the body in the woods. The case file thickened, but the answers didn't come. The letter on December 30th, 1988. The Davis family received an envelope in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were formed from letters cut out of magazines and glued unevenly to the page. Erica, cold, throat, rest, death. The message was cryptic, but when rearranged, investigators realized it formed a chilling sentence. She cannot be revived. The Davises collapsed when they saw it. The police called it the first direct communication from the suspect. A pattern emerges by now. The Ohio Bureau of Investigation had created a task force dedicated solely to the case. Their map showed 3 points, Fairfield, Ridgefield, and Brookfield, forming a triangle around Columbus. All 3 victims were young girls, abducted in daylight, last seen within a few miles of a major highway, and each crime scene suggested a methodical, deliberate offender. The behavioral analysts at Quantico sent an update. The subject is likely in his mid to late 20s. He drives a Japanese vehicle. He lives alone or with parents, socially withdrawn, possibly employed in a technical or printing-related job. He keeps trophies from victims. When one agent asked how many more children might die before they found him, Dr. Henson didn't answer. She simply circled the date on the board, February 1989, and wrote one word beneath it: next. The boxer prediction came true sooner than anyone expected. On February 6, 1989, nearly 2 months after Erica's murder, a cardboard box was found on the doorstep of the Carter home, the family of the first victim. Emily Robert Carter saw it as he left for work that morning. It was taped shut, unmarked. Inside, detectives would find dirt, tiny fragments of bone, several baby teeth, and a small, burned piece of fabric that matched the dress Emily had been wearing the day she vanished. At the bottom of the box was another note, this one more organized, more deliberate. Emily, burnt bones investigate. Handwriting analysts noted the same style of cut-out magazine letters as the one sent to the Davis family. The message was clear. The killer wanted them to know she was dead, and he wanted them to know he was watching. National panic by now, the story had overtaken national headlines. CNN, NBC, and the New York Times ran continuous coverage under the name The Ohio Child Murders. Police urged parents to escort children everywhere. Schools shortened hours. Communities held nightly prayer vigils. For the first time, Ohio's families began installing deadbolts on bedroom doors. What made the terror worse was the killer's silence, and then his taunting voice through letters. He was no longer content to hunt in secret. He wanted recognition, and he was about to get it. The taunting letters on February 10, 1989, 4 days after the box arrived, the Columbus Tribune received an envelope addressed to City Desk. Inside was a photograph of a smiling little girl, Emily Carter, and a 2-page letter typed on an old typewriter. The author identified himself only as TM. He wrote in detached, emotionless detail about how he had taken the girl, how she had played quietly, and how the light went out of her eyes when the moment came. He ended the letter with a sentence that froze every reporter in the newsroom. The angels keep her now, but her body belongs to me. The same letter was mailed to the Carters' home that evening. Linda Carter fainted when she saw it. Robert read it once and tore it to shreds. The FBI traced the postmark to a mailbox in Columbus, but fingerprints were smudged, and there was no usable DNA. It was the killer's way of saying, "I'm still here." Escalation. The task force held an emergency press conference the next morning. Lieutenant Simmons, now visibly aged by months without sleep, faced the cameras. "We are dealing with a serial offender. He has claimed responsibility for the abduction and murder of at least 3 children. We urge all parents to keep their children supervised at all times." Behind the podium, the faces of 3 little girls, Emily, Melissa, and Erica, were displayed side by side. The entire state of Ohio was officially terrified. By the summer of 1989, Ohio was a state living under siege. 3 children gone, 1 confirmed dead, and the man responsible was still free. Parents stopped letting their kids walk to school. Parks stood deserted. Newspaper headlines screamed "Monster at large." Police worked around the clock, but the investigation had turned into a maze of dead ends. Then on June 6, 1989, the nightmare returned. The vanishing in Columbus, 5-year-old Anna Monroe lived with her parents David and Catherine Monroe in the East River district of Columbus, a blue-collar neighborhood of brick duplexes and aging maple trees. That Tuesday afternoon was bright and humid. Anna was playing at East River Park, a small playground just 4 blocks from her home. She wore a red dress and carried her favorite plush bear, a toy she called Benny. Around 4:30 p.m., her mother checked the kitchen clock, expecting to hear Anna's laugh through the open window. Instead, there was silence. At 4:45, she went outside. The swing was still moving. Benny lay on the ground. Anna was gone. A city-paralyzed Columbus police mobilized instantly. Within 2 hours, over 150 officers, firefighters, and volunteers were searching every alley, shed, and wooded lot in the East River district. Helicopters scoured the riverbank. Divers searched drainage pipes. Reporters broadcast live from the scene. When word reached Fairfield and Ridgefield, fear surged again. The headlines read, The Ohio Killer strikes again. It was no longer just a story of missing girls. It was a full-blown manhunt. The press conference that evening, Lieutenant Simmons, now leading the statewide task force, stood before a forest of microphones. His voice was hoarse, his tie loosened, his face drained of color. "We are investigating the possible connection between this disappearance and 3 previous cases. Until further notice, we advise parents not to allow children outside unsupervised." When a reporter shouted, "Do you believe this is the same man?" Simmons paused. "I believe we're dealing with the same mind." Those words became the headline the next day, the breakthrough for weeks. Police scoured tips, cross-checked vehicle registrations, and interviewed hundreds of witnesses. They found nothing, until a small piece of luck arrived from an unexpected source. On July 23, 1989, in Hilliard, a suburb west of Columbus, 2 young sisters were playing at a local playground when a man approached them. He didn't speak. He just lifted a camera and began taking photos. Their father, Mark Reynolds, noticed. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, storming toward the man. The stranger froze, then bolted toward a nearby car, a dark gray Nissan Sentra, and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Reynolds noted the license plate number before the car disappeared. He called the police. The name and officer ran the plates. They were registered to Thomas Miller, age 27, resident of a 1-bedroom apartment in northwest Columbus. No criminal record. No parking tickets. A quiet, forgettable name. But when detectives checked employment records, they found that Miller worked part-time at a small printing company, one that used the same type of offset printer as the one that had produced the letters sent to the Carter and Davis families. A warrant was issued within hours. The search that night, at 10:15 p.m., police surrounded Miller's apartment complex. The hallways smelled faintly of ink and mildew. Inside apartment 2B, officers found a man sitting calmly at his desk, typing on an old Smith Corona typewriter. When asked his name, he said softly, "Thomas Miller." He didn't resist as they placed him in handcuffs. Detectives began their search. Inside the 1-bedroom unit, they found several rolls of 35mm film labeled with girls' names. Dozens of children's shoes carefully arranged on a shelf. A stack of newspaper clippings about the Ohio murders. Boxes filled with dolls, children's clothing, and videotapes. And in the closet, a set of plastic containers filled with ash and small fragments of bone. The confession, during interrogation, Miller barely blinked. He spoke in a detached monotone, answering questions as though describing someone else's life. "I didn't kill them," he said at first. "Ratman did." Detectives exchanged glances. "Who's Ratman?" "He lives inside me," Miller said. "He comes when I lose control. He wants to play with them." Over the next 48 hours, Miller confessed to abducting 4 girls, Emily Carter, Melissa Young, Erica Davis, and Anna Monroe. He described in detail how he lured them, where he took them, and what he did afterward. His accounts matched evidence the police had never made public. The FBI later described his demeanor as eerily calm, almost relieved. The evidence trail in his car, the same Nissan spotted near Lake Monroe, investigators found strands of hair matching Erica Davis and fabric fibers from Emily Carter's clothing. The trunk floor had traces of blood visible under luminol. At his workplace, technicians discovered that Miller had used company printers to create the ransom-like letters. He had even printed mock newspaper headlines about his own crimes. "He wanted to be part of the investigation," said Agent Langford. He wanted to see himself in print. When agents catalogued his possessions, they found over 6,000 VHS tapes, most of them horror and exploitation films. On several unlabeled tapes, they found his own recordings, home videos of the victims alive and smiling, taken days before their disappearances. It was the final proof they needed. The end of fear on July 25, 1989. Lieutenant Simmons stepped before the cameras one last time. Behind him were the photos of the 4 girls, draped in black ribbons. The suspect in the Ohio child murders, Thomas Miller, is in custody. He has confessed to all 4 abductions and homicides. For the first time in a year, the people of Fairfield County exhaled. Church bells rang that evening. Candles burned along sidewalks. Parents hugged their children and wept. But for the families of the victims, the relief was hollow. There would be no real closure, only the end of the nightmare. When the public saw Thomas Miller's photograph on the evening news, the thick glasses, the narrow face, the emotionless eyes, most people said the same thing. He looked so ordinary, that was the most disturbing part. He looked like someone you might see at a grocery store, or riding the bus, or standing in line at the post office. No one would have guessed that behind that quiet, almost timid exterior lived one of the most sadistic killers in American history. A childhood without warmth. Thomas Miller was born on March 28, 1962, in Akron, Ohio. His father, Gerald Miller, owned a small printing business. His mother, Evelyn, worked part-time as a secretary. They were upper middle class. Disciplined, conservative, deeply concerned with appearances. Thomas was born prematurely. A lack of circulation during birth caused a deformity in both his wrists, leaving them stiff and slightly twisted inward. Doctors said the condition wasn't severe, but for a growing boy, it meant constant ridicule. In school, he was called T-Rex and Clawboy. He learned to hide his hands in his pockets whenever possible. Children laughed. Teachers overlooked it. His parents told him to be a man. No one noticed the shame turning into something darker. The lonely boy from an early age, Thomas withdrew from the world. He didn't play sports, didn't have friends. Instead, he buried himself in books, especially comic books and horror magazines. While other kids were outside riding bikes, he sat in his room surrounded by stacks of Fangoria, Creepy, and Tales from the Crypt. He developed a fascination with monsters, not because they scared him, but because they were powerful. They didn't care what people thought of them, he once told a prison psychiatrist. They did whatever they wanted. At 10 years old, he began drawing grotesque figures, half human, half beast, attacking smaller creatures. When his mother found the sketches and threw them away, he stopped drawing altogether. But the images stayed in his mind. A family of silence. The Millers were the kind of family that never spoke about emotions. At dinner, conversation revolved around grades, chores, and church. If Thomas cried, his father's voice would cut through the air. "Stop that. You're not a baby." The only person who seemed to understand him was his grandfather, Edward Miller, a retired state senator who lived just outside Columbus. Edward was strict but affectionate in a way Thomas had never known. He would take the boy fishing, buy him books, listen to him talk about monsters and comic heroes. For Thomas, those weekends were a sanctuary. But in March 1988, Edward Miller died suddenly of a heart attack. Family members remembered Thomas standing motionless at the funeral, his hands shaking. He didn't cry. He just stared at the casket, whispering something under his breath. When his mother asked what he'd said, he replied, "He was the only one who liked me." That summer, the killings began. The breaking point after his grandfather's death, Thomas's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He began missing work, sleeping during the day, and spending entire nights watching horror movies on VHS. Neighbors recalled seeing the flicker of television light through his curtains at 3 a.m., sometimes accompanied by muffled laughter. His apartment walls were plastered with posters from slasher films, Halloween, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th. On his bookshelf were dozens of videotapes labeled with handwritten titles like Playtime. The Sleepers Angels Rest Police would later discover that many of these tapes contained footage of his victims, recorded before and after their deaths. He told investigators he couldn't distinguish between fiction and reality anymore. "It's all just film. he said during one interview. Sometimes the reel keeps going after the movie ends. A mind-divided psychiatrist who examined Thomas Miller after his arrest described a complex web of disorders. Narcissistic personality traits, marked by deep resentment and superiority fantasies. Sexual sadism, masked by emotional detachment. And possible dissociative episodes in which he created an alternate persona he called Ratman. When asked to describe Ratman, Miller said, "He's the one who does the things I can't. He fixes what's broken." To the doctors, Ratman represented the violent manifestation of Miller's suppressed rage, a mask that gave him permission to act without guilt. They noted his total absence of empathy. During interviews, he discussed the murders as if recounting scenes from a movie, with precision but no emotion. When asked if he felt sorry for what he'd done, he said simply, "I didn't hurt them. I just stopped the noise." Artifacts of obsession. The evidence from Miller's apartment painted a portrait of a man consumed by his fantasies. In his closet, police found children's shoes arranged by size and color, trophies from each abduction. His shelves held jars filled with ashes, each labeled with initials ECMYED, and on his desk sat a scrapbook, meticulously organized, containing every newspaper article about the Ohio murders. He had underlined his own name in the margins after his arrest. On the final page, written in red ink, were the words, "They know me now." Public reaction. When these details were revealed in court filings, the nation recoiled. People who had followed the case for months were horrified not just by the crimes, but by how normal Thomas Miller seemed. A man who worked quietly, paid his bills, and waved to neighbors. He had even volunteered at a local community center once, helping children paint Halloween masks. No one suspected the man with a gentle voice and awkward smile was cataloging his victims like collectibles. The media dubbed him the Otaku Killer, borrowing the Japanese word for obsessive fandom after journalists learned about his vast collection of horror and anime tapes. But in truth, Miller wasn't driven by fandom. He was driven by emptiness, a need to control life and death in a world that had always made him feel powerless. The final diagnosis, by the time court psychiatrists finished their evaluation, one conclusion stood out. Thomas Miller understood right from wrong. He chose wrong. Dr. Claire Henson summarized it best in her report. Thomas Miller is not insane. He is profoundly alienated, a man whose emotional isolation metastasized into predation. His crimes are not madness. They are will. Miller himself seemed to agree. During a final interview before trial, an agent asked him why he did it. He tilted his head, smiled faintly, and said, "Because I wanted to see what it felt like to be God." When Thomas Miller was led into the courtroom of the Franklin County Courthouse on a gray morning in February 1990, the crowd outside erupted in shouts. Dozens of reporters pushed against the barriers. Parents of the victims stood silently in the front row, clutching framed photographs of their daughters. For the first time, the man who had haunted Ohio for nearly a year stood in the open, thin, pale, hands cuffed, eyes hidden behind thick glasses. He looked like an accountant, not a killer. The trial of the decade. The prosecution charged him with 4 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping and desecration of human remains. They presented over 200 pieces of evidence, hair and fabric samples, videotapes, letters, and his own recorded confession. Each day the courtroom filled to capacity. National networks televised the proceedings. Across America, people watched the pale figure sit motionless as witnesses recounted the details of his crimes. The prosecutor, David Callahan, opened his statement with words that would echo through the country. "This man is not a mystery. He is not a monster from legend. He is what happens when a man loses his soul and nobody notices." The defense Miller's attorneys argued that their client suffered from dissociative identity disorder, claiming that the alternate personality, Rat Man committed the murders while Miller himself was unaware. Psychiatrists disagreed. Dr. Clare Henson testified that although Miller displayed signs of detachment and fantasy delusion, he fully understood his actions and their consequences. Thomas Miller planned these crimes, she said. He organized them, documented them, and took pride in them. That is not insanity. That is control. Miller sat through the testimony without emotion. Occasionally he scribbled notes or adjusted his glasses, but he never once looked toward the families of the victims. When shown photographs of the girls, he simply said, "I remember them," and turned away. The verdict after 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 9 hours. On March 29, 1990, the foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Gasps filled the courtroom. One mother sobbed quietly. Miller showed no reaction. The judge, Eleanor Reeves, addressed him directly. "You have committed crimes that defy comprehension. You stole not only lives, but the very sense of safety that binds a community together. The court sentences you to death." It was the first death sentence handed down in Franklin County in nearly a decade. Behind prison walls, Thomas Miller was transferred to Ohio State Penitentiary in Youngstown, where he spent the next 19 years. He rarely spoke. He refused all visitors except for his attorney, and later, a criminologist who interviewed him for research on serial offenders. In letters to the press, Miller complained about media lies and claimed he was misunderstood. He began reading theology, philosophy, and science fiction. Prison guards said he was polite, detached, like a man waiting for a train that never comes. At times he wrote strange poems and sketches, fragmented sentences about angels, fire, and silence. One note found in his cell read simply, "They never left me. They're still here whispering." For the families of the victims, the trial had brought conviction but not peace. Linda Carter moved away from Fairfield the following year, unable to bear the sight of her old home. Patricia Young attended every parole hearing until her death in 2002, leaving behind a scrapbook of Melissa's drawings. Sandra Davis started a foundation for missing children that still bears her daughter's name. David and Catherine Monroe had another child in 1993, naming her Grace, because we needed a reason to keep living. Each family carried its own quiet version of survival, the final appeal. Throughout the 1990s, Miller's defense team filed numerous appeals, arguing procedural errors and psychological instability. Each was denied. By the early 2000s, the public had mostly moved on. New tragedies filled the headlines, and the Ohio child murders became a grim chapter in the state's past, revisited only in documentaries and anniversary specials. Still, every few years the story returned. A new generation would see his face on screen, hear the recordings of his confession, and feel again that old chill. The end on June 17, 2008, Thomas Miller's final appeal was exhausted. At dawn he was escorted from his cell. He showed no resistance, no fear. A chaplain offered to pray with him. He declined. When asked for a final statement, Miller looked toward the observation window where the victims' families sat and said softly, "None of this was supposed to matter." Moments later, it was over. Outside, a storm rolled across the Ohio sky. Reporters stood in the rain as the official announcement came through. Thomas Miller, convicted of the abduction and murder of 4 minors between 1988 and 1989, was pronounced deceased at 6:14 a.m. Legacy in the years that followed, Thomas Miller's crimes became a cautionary tale in criminal psychology courses across the United States. His case influenced new laws on child abduction, mental health screening, and media ethics in reporting violent crimes. But beyond the legal reforms, what lingered most was the silence, the reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, behind ordinary doors under the quiet hum of suburban life. "He didn't just kill children," Lieutenant Simmons said in a later interview. "He killed trust." in our neighborhoods, in each other. Even now, decades later, the people of Fairfield still remember the summer when the laughter of children disappeared from the streets. Some say the town never really recovered. It just learned to live with the memory. By the time Thomas Miller was gone, the world had already changed. The internet had arrived. Television had multiplied into hundreds of channels. People carried cameras in their pockets. And yet, in every dark corner of the web, every true crime documentary, his shadow still flickered. He had become something else. No longer a man, but an algorithm, a story retold. A ghost moving through the machine of memory. The story that wouldn't die within a year of his death. Streaming networks released documentaries dissecting every aspect of the case. The Otaku Killer, The Mind of Thomas Miller, Suburban Fear, The Silence of Fairfield. Actors recreated his crimes. Psychologists debated his psyche, and journalists interviewed anyone who had ever known his name. The public, once terrified of him, now consumed him like entertainment. In a sense, that was what he'd wanted all along, to be seen, to be known, to exist. He fed on attention, said retired agent Peter Langford. Even now he's getting what he wanted. We made him immortal. Langford refused to appear in later documentaries. We turned a murderer into a myth, he said. And the victims? People barely remember their names. The era of obsession. In the years following Miller's execution, criminologists began referring to his case as the first digital age serial myth. Because of him, police departments across America launched new initiatives to track predatory behavior online and in fan communities obsessed with violence. Yet the paradox remained. The more society studied killers like Miller, the more fascinated the public became. Podcast hosts dissected his tapes frame by frame. Reddit forums debated his psychology. Fans sent letters to the penitentiary long after he was gone, as if evil could still answer. The children's names every few years. On the anniversaries of their deaths, small memorials appear across Fairfield County. At the edge of East River Park, there's a modest granite plaque beneath an oak tree. It reads, "In memory of Emily, Melissa, Erica, and Anna, may their light outshine the darkness that took them. No ceremony accompanies it. No speeches. Just flowers left by strangers who never knew their faces, only their story." Sometimes on warm summer evenings, parents can be seen pushing strollers past the memorial. Children laugh again in the park. Life always finds its way back. But for those who lived through that time, the laughter will always sound a little haunted. Reflections in the dark. When asked years later what haunted him most about the case, Lieutenant Harold Simmons, now retired, didn't mention the photos, the letters, or the crime scenes. He said, "It was how easy it was for him to disappear, to live among us, to look normal. We're taught that monsters live in the dark, but sometimes they wave at you from across the street." His words became the closing line of a 2010 documentary about the case. It faded to black over the sound of a child's laughter echoing through empty streets. Legacy of fear and understanding, psychologists still cite Miller's case as a turning point in understanding isolation and identity in late 20th century America. He was not just a killer. He was a mirror held up to a culture that had begun to lose connection, a generation retreating into fantasy, television, and solitude. In that sense, he was both symptom and sickness. Dr. Henson once said, "Miller wasn't born evil. He was born invisible, and when no one saw him, he made sure the world would never look away again." The ghost in the machine today, his name surfaces in crime databases, psychology textbooks, and the darker corners of true crime fandom. Yet in a strange way, Thomas Miller no longer belongs to himself. He belongs to the story, retold, reshaped, repurposed. The ghost that haunts every question about what turns a man into a monster. The files remain locked in the archives of the Ohio State Police, sealed under the label Case 117, the Otaku Killer. No one opens them anymore. There's nothing left to learn, only to remember. Still, sometimes a young detective new to the force will ask an older one, "What was he like?" And the answer always the same: he was quiet. You wouldn't have noticed him. And somewhere, very deep in the cold vaults of evidence, a single VHS tape sits unlabeled, its image flickering in static, the face of a child smiling at a camera that will never stop recording,